I'm so tired of people saying that it's just a movie, it's just a comic book, it's just a TV show. Whatever. No, it's not. Stories are the building blocks of our culture, of ourselves, even of our own psychology. We are a product of the stories we tell ourselves about our own past and the experiences on a daily basis, but also the stories that we choose to spend time with. What types of values, our feelings, or whatever are they promoting? What types that we like to spend our time around? They're going to shape us. They're going to shape our personality and character, and they're going to shape our perception of the world and the acts and behaviors that we put out into the world. And people don't understand that. They go, it's just a movie. It's just this. I can like and promote whatever I want. Well, of course you can, but you should pay attention to the responsibility that you have.
Consume stories responsibly.
As a member of society, as a human being, responsibility to yourself.
Consider the consequences.
You need some balance. You need some certain criteria that is going to make sure you're promoting the right kind of works, or at least have thought through the type of work that this or that story is going to do in our culture, and then make your own decision whether or not that's something you want to support.
Consume stories responsibly. Consider the consequences. Consume stories responsibly.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another Office Hours live stream. We have made it through another week. We did it. I'm excited about tonight's show. I'll get to that in a second, but as you see from the thumbnail, I'll be interviewing Doug Brode. You guys who have been listening to my channel for a while have heard me talk about his work for quite a while, so excited about that. But let me welcome the chat. I did see Eldritch fans popped in when I first set up the stream the other night, so welcome to you. And Ghost Planet Max Inc. It's great to have you back, but you are making up for lost time, my friend. You dropped a book in the comments, but great to see you there. Crystal Ashes, Nathaniel Zalozball, and more Ghost Planet. Glad to have you back. Get it all out of your system. Of course, my dear sweet sound engraver, she's going to be here helping me with the chat and the links and all of that stuff. So I've been recommending Shelly to her. She's got it on her reading list, so she's going to be reading that very soon. But she has the link to Doug's books. That's always down in the description. So as we're talking and as we're chatting about things, the links are down in the description. But sound engraver is going to pop it in the chat every so often, so you can take a look and find how to get these books, as well as they are on Audible. We don't have links to that, but they're on Audible too, because I know some of you are more audiobook fans. Private Eye in Retrospectiva, Stephen M. Great to see you all there. And Tom Spiegel, Studio Super, Big Al popping in. Good to see you there, Big Al. And more people coming in now that we're live. So great to see you all there. I'm excited about tonight's stream. It was a while ago, a few months ago, that I contacted, or that I did a review of one of Doug's books. We got in contact with each other, and when it was first set up that he was going to come on my stream, I was kind of fanboying out a little bit because I really liked the books. And but since then we've emailed a little bit, so I'm calm. I've got my collected cool composure down and everything, so all is well now. But let me go ahead and introduce, as you see in the description, what I've written there. He's had an amazing career. He's been he's been a storyboard editor and prop illustrator. He'll tell us about that in a moment. For great movies. I mean, all the way back to Harry Potter, Van Helsing, Sleepy Hollow, Thor, Ironman, so many great films that he's worked on. And of course, he ended up helming his own series on Cinemax. We talked about that. And he's, ever since about 2020, I think, he's been writing these novels, and he's written 4 already, and the 5th is coming out this summer, the sequel to Shelley, which is behind me there. So that's why we're talking right here at the end of May. So yeah, it'll be a fun talk. We're going to talk about his career, but also the writing process, because I know a lot of you who follow my channel, you're writers, you're artists, you're wanting to do books on your own or comics or something like that. So it's going to be fun. But without further ado, welcome Doug Brode to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. Definitely been looking forward to this for a while.
Me too. I really enjoyed your reviews. You were the first YouTuber to do a review of Shelley, which I really appreciated.
I've been meaning to ask you, how did you find that? Because I like, did you find it in a Google search one day?
I've been submitting my books to other people, just some booktubers and stuff. And, I hadn't heard anything. And so I was always looking at like book reviews and stuff that popped up.
Gotcha.
and just to see what was being reviewed and instead of my book. And I just happened to come across it. So I
nice.
Very touched. Actually, cool. A booktuber called Michael Goes Nowhere or Michael something like that. Just did a booktube review or whatever for Shelley. And actually he was really kind, which was nice because after reviewing mine, he then reviewed And Then There Were None, which is the biggest selling mystery book of all time and the greatest mysteries I've ever read. So I was like, man, that's tough company. And then afterwards, he was talking about he's starting The Shining. I'm like, you're starting The Shining? The guy's like,
wow,
you're starting The Shining?
Yeah, that's
missed it for the first 3 decades or whatever.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I was glad that he liked it as well. So slowly but surely, I've been getting a little bit of notice over the last few months with Shelley.
Cool.
So.
Yeah. It takes a while to get cracking into the business or into the YouTube sphere or whatever. So glad to help with that. Let's go ahead and start then with. I know that I've got a lot of artists on my chat, and we're eventually going to get into the writing and the process and everything, but. From what I understand, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but you started doing the storyboard illustrating and such. Were you writing even from a young age while you were doing that, or was this the kind of first creative field you went into?
No, I started as an artist. I was originally going to be a comic book artist.
Oh, cool. Okay, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and I went to a place called Joe Kubert, which is a comic book school. And I left after 2 years, and I went to college. And then when I was in college, I'm dating myself here, but I saw Coppola's Dracula.
Yes, nice.
And I really noticed the artistry of it. And Mike Mignola had done the comic book adaptation, and he mentioned at the end of the book they had done some storyboards for Coppola. I'm like, well, what's a storyboard? And I got kind of interested in film off of that, and I was obviously already into film and stuff. And so I came out and I was a runner for a guy named Joel Silver who made The Matrix and Die Hard and stuff. Funny story about The Matrix is he was developing that when I was working there, and I read the script and I got about 30 pages in. I'm like, I don't get it. People forget, but at the time, everybody passed on me. Nobody knew what to make of The Matrix. So what Joel Silver did was he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to storyboard over a year and a half or whatever, the entire movie beginning to end with these gorgeous panels. And that's how he sold it to Warner Brothers because the script was brilliant, of course, but it was so brilliant that nobody really had a context for it. And we're like, so the storyboards really helped on that. And at the same time, I was a runner and I kept putting up pictures up on the wall. And they were like, we're gonna have to fire you if you keep them up because they're in the middle of the office. I'm like, dude, you guys are paying me $400 a week. You do what you want to do. And I was a lot more blasé back then. And the director of a movie called House on Hill is walking by on his cell phone. He's like, I need a storyboard, right? I'll take this guy. And
nice.
I got into the union on my first show. And they got me into the union. And, so that was my first film. And then after that, I did Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes. And I designed all the weapons and all the props for that. And my big break for storyboards and really kind of like moving the ball forward was Van Helsing. I did Van Helsing. And that was the one that after that, I was able to work a lot more steady.
Cool. So. Yeah. Now, I've got a couple of really ignorant questions here about it because I was talking to Sound Engraver, my wife, in the chat there. I was like, okay, so he's a prop illustrator. That's either designing the props or like matte painting. I gotta ask him what is exactly that. So you're designing the props for the film, right?
I'm designing all the weapons, all the banners, anything that anybody touches.
Gotcha.
So like in Thor, all the Asgardian weapons, I designed everything that was Asgardian. The hammer, I worked on the handle, but I didn't work on the whole thing. They had one guy working on the hammer forever, and then I did all the Asgardian weapons. And in fact, my wife and I, who's then my girlfriend, she and I went to Thor 2, and which I had nothing to do with. And there were more of my designs in that movie than anything else I've ever worked on, because all the stuff I didn't make in the first film made in the second one. So like his mother's gold sword, what happened was I gave all the Asgardians gold weapons because in 1980, I think, they made a Flash Gordon movie, and Flash Gordon had this gold sword, but he never used it. He holds it up like threateningly at the end, but does nothing with it. So I'm like, why don't we make all the Asgardians have gold weapons? And so that's why the Asgardians now have gold weapons. Is my nod to Flash Gordon. And another nod in that movie was there's a guy called Volstagg who's got an axe, and I gave him a triple bladed axe, and he's got 3 blades, and that was my nod to Sword and the Sorcerer, which it was another early 80s movie. Yeah, it had this really cool triple bladed sword that I never forgot.
Yeah.
And so that movie was filled with designs and stuff that were nods to things that I had grown up with. And so I'll sketch them up, and then the prop master, the guy I'm working for, he'll present them to the director, and the director will pick the ones he likes, and then they'll make those. And so also I did JJ's Star Trek. I designed all the Romulan and the Klingon stuff. Nobody knows this. I think they show on the DVD extras, but we spent months working on Klingons for Rura Pente prison planet that then was cut from the movie. Because in that movie, if you watch it, the villain's like gone for 30 years. Like he shows up, kills Kirk's dad, and then pops up 20 some odd years later or whatever. And you're like, well, where was this dude hanging out? What happened was he was arrested by the Klingons, and he breaks out to go find Spock at that point. And I don't know why they cut it, because that actually made it like a little more sense. But
sure, yeah.
So we just spent a lot of time designing Klingons stuff for that too.
Yeah, that's great. I like the little intertextuality things of the references and whatnot. I didn't pick those up, but that's cool. We definitely need more Flash Gordon love for that movie as well. That was cool. So I got some questions in the chat here as well. We're going to talk about obviously your books and the design a little bit later, but I had this question myself. How much of a hand as an artist did you have in the cover designs of your books? Because Sound Engraver and Crystal Ashes have been asking that.
Oh, I designed all of them. I didn't paint them, but I designed all of them. In fact, the cover to the ship, I sketched out before writing my very first page of my very first book. Like I had it all sketched out in a little notepad. The Ship's Revenge cover didn't come out quite the way I wanted to. I wanted him reaching out. He's red and black, and there's a reason for it. He's called the Prime. He's in the book. Yeah. The third one is my daughter, and that's another one where I sketched it up, and I took the photograph. So that one's
nice.
And I wanted to look kind of like Firestarter. I don't know if you remember the Firestarter movie poster, but I kind of wanted that vibe. And then Shelley, yes, I sketched up the Shelley one. And then the newest one, I don't know if anybody can see it, but that's the newest one. And for reasons that I can't explain, at the end of the first Shelley book, Shelley goes from an it to a she, and Shelley doesn't look outwardly like a machine anymore in the new book. And that's a major plot point for this one, because nobody knows that she's a machine, and there aren't any synthetics that look human. And so that becomes a big part of the story. And so like in this cover, you can see it's like an X-ray revealing what's underneath. So she looks human here, more human than she did in this one. Because this one, she was branded with all the synthetics have these brandings like slaves, and they actually have like a plastic resin skin. Mm-hmm. So even in the sequel, they're all called it's, except for Shelley, who looks human. So I called her she. Also made it a lot easier, because I got to tell you, making the pronoun it for your lead character throughout a whole book was a nightmare. And once you commit to it, like you're in it for a year doing that. I'm like, no, the second book, she's a she. Okay. I'm just, it wasn't even a political decision. It was a writing decision. I needed her to become a she, because I couldn't do it anymore. Yeah.
That's like trying to write in present tense or something as opposed to past tense.
What is with that? Everybody's doing present tense now. I went to the bookstore today. I looked at the new King book. I opened it up. It was present tense. I put it back.
Is it really?
To read a book that's present tense. I hate present
tense. I did not know that.
Because I used to write screenplays. I wrote like 30 or 40 of them. And quite a few were sold and this and that. And that was all present tense. So when I think of scripts, I think present tense. But when I think of books, it's a story. It should absolutely be past tense. When you become a writer long enough, you just start to have opinions, and you're like an old fudgety guy. Like, no, get off my lawn.
I hear you.
Present tense. So,
well, you actually answered a question that I had for you later too. Was about so since you did develop the illustration, I was going to see is that true to your mind's eye? How the characters would have looked, and that's great.
Thea is a beautiful. Thea was the artist, by the way, who painted it for a company called Jim Pink. She's done all my covers, but I do send in a sketch and everything.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's really cool. And did you want to share that storyboard of yours now, or did you have a story about that later? You wanted to bring it up?
Storyboards, if you want. So just so you know what a storyboard is for anybody who might not know.
Sure.
Imagine you were doing Jurassic Park, and you have Jeff Goldblum. I think that was his name, right? Jeff Goldblum? Yeah. He's in the Jeep, and he's being chased by a T-Rex, right? So the Jeep and the actor, obviously, they're real. And then everything behind them, maybe the forest is, and maybe it's not. Either it's called practical, which is a real set, or it's nothing there. Today, you probably wouldn't even put the trees in there. But the dinosaur is obviously not there. So you have to sketch out, where's Jeff Goldblum? Where's the camera in position? So the camera's mounted on the Jeep, looking at Jeff Goldblum on frame right. And then on frame left, you've got the dinosaur. And then they can look at this. It's like a comic book for the crew. So they know where all the visual effects are going to be. You also need it for stunts. because if you're doing stunts, you need to have everybody has to be on the same page. They have to know exactly shot by shot what we're doing that day.
Yeah.
So storyboards are like a comic book for the crew, but it's very meticulously like, this is the camera angle, this is what we're doing. So yeah, I can show a few examples of that.
Sure. And while you're pulling that up, you have to work pretty closely with the director directly then, exactly for that, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, I work with the director. Usually the director will give me a basic some notes, and we'll look at the script together. He'll give me some basic ideas of what he wants, and then I will go off on my own. And then usually directors react to what you're drawing, and then you go back and forth. On a movie I did called Looper, the director of that, Ryan Johnson, knew every single shot. It was the only time I ever had that happen in 27 years. He had notebooks of every single shot. So for anybody who had a problem with The Last Jedi, myself included, he had that planned a year in advance, shot by shot. I guarantee.
Oh my gosh.
Because he was meticulous. And the funny thing is that the very first conversation I ever had with Ryan Johnson was about The Empire Strikes Back, because he had the making of The Empire Strikes Back on his table. And we were talking about it, and I was a fan of the prequels, and he wasn't as much of a fan. So we were talking about that. And so I thought it was funny that years later, then he would go on to make the second film in the other trilogy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so these are, can everybody see my screen? Can you see the screen?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay. So these are this is back when I used pen and ink. I brought these up because these are ones that are popular online, because the creature from Bakagoon was cut from Van Helsing. And so I did a whole storyboard where we were originally going to have Frankenstein's monster fight him and everything. I couldn't find the fight scene, but I did find this in my computer.
Awesome.
And anybody who wants to find more, you can look up Van Helsing storyboards. And I do know that the fight with Frankenstein's monster is online. It got leaked somehow. I didn't put it up, but it's been up there. So these were back when I used to work in like pen and ink. And back then I was really trying to make my boards like pretty. This is very Bernie Wrightson in style, which I thought fit the tone of this movie. And so these are done at 3 an hour. Now I'm much faster. I do 4 an hour, and these are what they look like now. I do everything on computer now. This is for a movie called Uglies, which is now on Netflix.
Oh, cool.
And these are done at 3 to 4 an hour. And so this is like, it shows them, okay, we're going to be above the helicopter, this and that. And this is one where like the director McGee, he and I got along really well. He gave me a lot of free reign. So I would draw it up, and then he would make some tweaks here and there of what he liked and what he didn't like and this and that. But like something like this where, so the bad guy's walking up, she sees the hero trapped in this chamber. The hero's gloating. She's looking at them, and then we do a rack focus, which means the focus changes from our hero to something in the background in a POV shot. And the villain goes, huh, what's that? And then we start to reveal behind them, there's this giant helicopter. It rises into frame. And then we go outside the window to reveal it in all its glory. The villain reacts. One of the heroes starts shooting whatever kind of gun they've got. I made it generic because I didn't know what they were going to have. And then all hell breaks loose and it starts smashing all the things. And, we have a flood and all that. So that's kind of, what I do.
That's great. Yeah. Well, to kind of segue to the other question I had about that, Studio Super's asking, you wanted to be a comic book artist first. You mentioned Wrightson already. And I think I've heard you say Frank Miller as well one time, if I'm not wrong. But like, what were some of the artists, I guess, that made you want to pursue that adverse the comic writing first?
I'm sorry, I asked me 1 second. Is that? I just want to make sure that screen's gone now, just because
it is. It's gone. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. What was the question?
Studio Super says, you say you wanted to be a comic artist. What works or people made you want to pursue that?
Well, certainly one of my biggest influences was Todd McFarlane, the original Amazing Spider-Man run.
Yeah.
And he was really good actually when I was struggling first as a storyboard artist, because he's got a very loose style. And, the key to being a storyboard artist is really, one of them is to be loose. You got to be able to really crank them out. I'm trying to think of who else is so long ago. My influences for being a comic book artist, Bernie Wrightson was certainly one of them. I was a big Frazetta fan. Not really with comic books, but he did start in comic books and did some stuff. But really, all those were the artists I really liked. But I do remember being really, in the early 90s, late 80s, or whatever that period was, really being into, Todd McFarlane. I like Jim Lee. Mm-hmm. I don't like Jim Lee as much as I used to, just because my tastes have changed. But that's nothing against him. It's just my taste changes as you get older. But Todd McFarlane's, the lessons that I learned from him, I still incorporate in my own way now. you know?
Yeah.
But your interest changes. Like when I was younger, if you asked me what's the greatest movie of all time, I'd say The Empire Strikes Back. But at 53, I've seen enough movies and read enough books to know there's really no such thing. And your taste changes as you get older and you get into other things. And, you know, when I was a kid, I didn't get The Godfather. Now I love The Godfather. So, you know, it's...
Yeah. Well, I can already tell. I mean, if you're game, I'm definitely going to have you back on other nights, because we could spend a lot of time talking about, you know, any of these segments. But I do want to transition to the writing, so we have plenty of time to talk about that process and everything. And maybe one of the segue questions I have for that is, so you wanted to be a comic book writer at first. You got all this experience, storyboard, illustrator,
comic book artist first.
Comic book writer. I mean, artist. I'm sorry. Yeah, comic book artist. And you got all that experience with the storyboard art now. Now that you're an actual writer, you're a novelist. Is there maybe any time in the future where you would try writing and illustrating your own comic, or doing a comic version of one of your novels?
Probably not. You know, when I was younger, I own a lot of comics now, but they're all like collections of Savage Sword of Conan, things that I grew up with. I have no interest in the new ones.
Nice.
So I tend to like the stuff that I grew up with. But when I'm reading, I really like to. I'd rather read Howard now. For those who know, Robert E. Howard created Conan. I'd rather read Howard's stories than the comic book adaptions, just because he can paint a picture in my head that's more interesting to me now. That's nothing against comics. I still like comics, but I probably I would rather paint a picture in people's minds than draw them out. Also, I draw for a living. I mean, I'm drawing literally every single day for 8 hours a day. Sure. So no, the idea of doing that on my time off is no.
I hear you.
My goal is to transition completely from art to writing full time. And because I made some money on screenwriting, but the problem with screenwriting was, you know, like a couple of years ago, I sold the script. They give you about $25,000 advance, right? And then if it goes in production, you get a lot more. They never go into production. They'll buy lots of scripts. So yeah, I've sold a bunch of scripts, but then they end up on a shelf. And Shelley was originally a screenplay that in 2000, I did it in November 2008. I just come back. I created a TV show called Forbidden Science. Yeah. And for HBO, who owns Cinemax. And I wasn't completely thrilled with everything they did with that. They added way too much adult material. That it was supposed to be a sexy show. They just really took it to the extreme. And there's a whole great documentary by the way on Good Bad Flicks. I highly recommend it. They talk about it for an hour. Like these guys were like real fans. Like they were doing like marathons with their friends. I'm like, wait, really? You're watching like this spicy softcore stuff with your friends on set? Okay. But
that's where the character Shelley first made an appearance, or a character named Shelley.
No,
right?
Shelley wasn't in it. But what happened was I was outlining the season 2, and I came up with the idea of a Shelley detective, and I wrote a pilot called Homeland, and it got more interest than any other script, like big name people, like Chris Columbus, who did the first 2 Harry Potter movies, was interested in it. David Bowie's son, who had done a movie called Moon, was interested in it. And so it got a lot of attention, but it didn't get made. And so I always put it on the shelf thinking, maybe that'll be my first book. But then in 2017 or 2017, I wrote like 50 pages as a book. And I wasn't ready to write. It was too big of a world. There was too many politics and all these things. And I just wasn't ready. So I spent 2.5 years learning how to transition from screenwriting into book writing. I took a night class at UCLA. Which wasn't as helpful as I'd hoped it would be, but it did force me to sit down and do it. And then COVID hit, and my wife was like, "Why don't you finish that book?" So I did. It took me about 2.5 years to write The Ship, and then all my other books have been a year apart.
Okay, nice.
So once I get over that hump, once you've eaten the elephant once, you can do it, and then it's a lot easier. The mental block is the hardest part of writing a book.
I'm sure. Let me get this one last question, because Studio Super chatted it, and I just didn't want to ignore him there. But one last question about the illustration before I delve in more to the writing. He said, would you say that storyboarding and comic art making are so similar that it's practically the same, or are there fundamental differences between the two?
Completely different. And let me tell you why. So my very first job was House on a Hill. And I was struggling the first time I started. And I was trying to make the panels all look cool. And the director pulled me aside and said, only 25% of storyboarding has anything to do with drawing. The problem was he didn't tell me what the other 75% was. So it took me a career to figure out what the other 75% was. What he was talking about was camera direction, knowing what a camera can and cannot do, understanding visual effects, understanding how to communicate with a crew a shot. And comic books, you can have people flip around left and right. You can't do that in a movie. If somebody's on frame right, you have to transition in with another shot or something to showing them why they've now switched to frame left.
Mhm.
It's a very different process. So a comic book artist can absolutely not jump into storyboards right away without really knowing a lot about film.
Well, in the same vein, then, storyboarding versus comic writing, also screenwriting versus novels. You said you took the class. Some of it's helpful, not much was helpful. What was probably what was one of the biggest things you had to learn going to novel writing from screenwriting? Was it filling in the description or not description, but interiority of characters or something? I don't know.
It was about, when you write a screenplay, everything is very face value. John walked through the door. John walks through the door. That's all you have to. There's no emotional. Any emotion comes through the dialogue. And ironically, when I did my first trilogy, it was a sci-fi horror. So there was lots of description. I really got into the heads and really got into the smells and the senses and all the things that could bring in anxiety to both the characters and hopefully the reader. Yeah. And then Shelley is the complete opposite. Shelley has very little description. Shelley is much more dialogue based. I think there's one paragraph in the whole book where they're driving through DC at the beginning where I do describe a little bit what it looks like. And then after that, it's just I lean on the dialogue to explore the world, and I have minimal description. So I got more confident about cutting down some of the description as I went. Also, there were different genres. One's a detective sci-fi, the other's a horror sci-fi. So horror, you want more meat on the bone, and mysteries, you want to keep it snappy and keep it moving.
Now, let me clarify the timeline here. You wrote Shelley during 2020 COVID lockdown, or was it the ship?
I wrote the ship during the ship.
Okay, gotcha.
But I had started Shelley in 2017 to be my first book. I got 50 pages in and I stopped. And those 50 pages more or less are pretty close to what was in the book. I changed a few scenes, but generally those pages did make it in the book. It just, I dug them out after doing the trilogy. And the reason I got into, I always knew I was going to do Shelley after I did this trilogy. But when I was finishing Children of the Ship was when you started to see all this stuff on the news about, pronouns and stuff. And I started thinking, well, how would a machine identify itself?
Yeah.
Because it's built to look like a human woman, but it probably considers humans kind of inferior. So it's like, it would probably consider itself an it. And I thought, so the opening line of the book, Shelley, an it, not a she, stood in a vast wheat field staring at a farmhouse. That opening line came to me. I was like, okay, now I'm ready to go because now it's topical.
Yeah.
And I believe I've done a good enough job that I've had both conservatives and liberals like it because it doesn't have a point of view about today. It does use that concept of that I wouldn't have had a few years ago. I never would have thought 5 or 6 years ago of, how would a machine, because data was called a he, and this and that. So I thought that added a little extra dimension to it,
Yeah, it does what I think good fiction should do, which is take any issues or whatever that might be in the ether and then recontextualize them. Don't argue one way or the other, but recontextualize it in this new format that we can explore and so it does a great job with that, definitely. I shudder to think though what the centipede like sex bot would identify as.
The point of this, so for those of you who don't know, because I am assuming the vast majority of people watching this haven't read Shelley yet, there is a scene in a sex club, and in it, I take things to the most extreme possible because my idea was, can you imagine if they really did have robots like this, how far they would take it? Because the normal vanilla sex that we think of or anything like that would probably be gone within the first 24 hours. It'd be like, how far can we take this? So there is this like centipede type creature that's going through the audience of the strip show with all these different sexual organs attached to it. And it's kind of titillating the audience as they're watching a strip show or something. And the idea of that was just to show how extreme this was getting. And that was actually the only like adultish scene in the whole book. But that was in my and I thought, I should keep that because I thought it was a good example of, because most of the book is so much about the detective mystery that I thought it was good to show on the fringes just how extreme, some of these elements have gotten with machines and stuff.
Yeah, and I didn't say that. I shouldn't have. I don't want to make anybody think it's an adult-oriented book, like in that respect or anything. But it struck me because I told Sound Engraver too. I was like, that is exactly what would happen as soon as the technology is available. We'd have furry bots. We'd have all kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah, but let me say too, I meant to say this at the beginning, but at the end we are going to do a giveaway. Doug's graciously agreed to give away a signed copy of Shelley. Yeah. So just stick around for that. That's coming. And Shelley is, you guys, those of you who listen to my channel for a while, know I did the review. I loved it. It's got, I don't know, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I think it could be described as having elements of cyberpunk in it. It is a future. It's not crazy different from our future, but it's different enough to be a good science fiction future. We got technology that we don't quite readily have available. So yeah, no, it's a great detective story, great detective mission. You want to know these characters, and you've got to start with the book Shelley. We're going to talk a little bit about Murder Mind at the end, the sequel to Shelley that's coming out in the summer, but you really have to start with Shelley. So you want to go ahead and buy your copy now from that link that Sound Engraver is dropping in the chat or the description below. It's an easy read. It's a fun read. Great summer read too, I think. So yeah, check that out so you can be ready for the sequel. But
that's very nice of you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But first, we should say something about the ship, though, because this is a big endeavor, this trilogy, and I wanted to read the third one so badly before we did the interview, but I wanted to reread Shelley first just to have it fresh in my mind. So I've read the first two. And this is a big endeavor. Now, I did hear somewhere that you were, I think it was on the Good Bad Flicks, that you were a big X-Files fan back in the day. And where did we kind of know where the Shelley idea came from these other projects? Where did the idea of the ship, the kind of sci-fi horror epic story come from?
Well, it was my first book, and I thought, I should keep it pretty contained. Shelley was not contained. Shelley was Shelley's about a senator who gets killed in the middle of Washington, D.C., and they're not sure if it's a synthetic or a human did it. So that automatically, that one line premise brings in all kinds of politics and all kinds of world building. And so I wanted something much more contained. And I had another idea for a project called The Ship. And it was trapped inside a UFO, about somebody trapped inside the UFO. Basically, you have two groups of people. You have those that are trapped inside the ship and those outside the ship trying to get in. And I thought that would be easier for a first book to keep it more contained. Sure. And then it did keep growing as I went, but, I kept it, I think, relatively contained.
Sure,
obviously, the saga continues from there. The big influences for that book were Michael Crichton's Sphere and Stephen King's Tommyknockers, which I didn't love. And I'm a big Stephen King fan, or especially his early work. And I feel that you can learn for other writers. You can learn a lot from writers that you love when you're like, they dropped the ball. They didn't quite make it. Stephen King thinks Tommyknockers is his worst book. It's not. That's like Steven Spielberg saying Temple of Doom is his worst movie. It's not. It's not even remotely close, dude. It's like so far from your worst, it's not even close. It's actually my favorite of that trilogy. But Tommyknockers, I saw, I wish he'd done this, or I wish he'd done that. And a great way to start a book is, I wish he'd done this. What if we did this? What if we did this is a great way to start. And so I incorporated some of those ideas. So that's how that trilogy started.
Yeah. Now you had the idea and you went with it. I was going to talk about the writing process. Some people always ask, where do you get your ideas? Generating ideas, and as a writer, they're always there. Everybody has ideas that come through. It just depends on what idea you kind of want to fixate on for a while. But you go from idea. What makes an idea story worthy for you? Do you have to have sort of a hook and a narrative idea that comes along with it? Because I get ideas as a short story writer. I get really cool ideas all the time, and I think, I'd love to do something with that, but I don't have the story yet. Does that come to you at the same time, or does it come in different phases? How does that work with you?
I have to beat it out, and by that I mean I have to figure out the beats of it and see if it's got enough meat on the bone. Like I knew what originally my third Shelley book was going to be, and I started beating it out. I'm like, this isn't going to work. It was going to be an undercover story, and I was like, man, there's nothing happening for the first 100 pages. It's like people are going to fall asleep. So it just didn't work. I really wanted to do that. I thought it was a clever idea that I had for it, but it wasn't going to work once I started beating it out. So I figured out another storyline, and then I looked at the beats for that, especially the first half. When I'm planning a novel, I never write an outline for the whole book. It's too daunting.
Nice with that.
So what I do is I outline to the midway point. The midway point is everything. And that's where the story completely changes. And let me give the viewers a couple of examples in case they want to be writers. So remember Aliens? The first half of that is finding out what happened to the colonists. That's really the whole story of the first half. Yeah, you got the Ripley things going on, but it's basically what happened to the colonists. Midway point, colonists are dead, aliens show up, most of the Marines are wiped out, and then the second half is a completely different story. It's like, we got to get out of here. How do we get off the planet? That's a sequel. It's a different story. Original Star Wars, the first half is about finding Princess Leia. Midway point, hi, I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you. The entire second half is about escaping the Death Star. Even when they're trying to blow it up, it's because it's coming to destroy Yavin. They're trying to escape it. So those are two different stories. So if you approach your book not like I have to write 350 or 400 pages or whatever your book length is going to be, but I have to write half that, oh man, your job just became a whole lot easier. And it makes your midway point that much more impactful. It needs to either be a false success or a false defeat. False because it's not over. But it needs to be one of those two things. And your whole first half is building up to that moment. So what I do is I outline to that point, and then I say, okay, now I've really screwed my characters over. Let's see how they get out of this. And it doesn't always work completely smoothly. Like on my new book, it's a 350-page manuscript. The last 120 pages were thrown out after I read the rough draft. I knew it wasn't even working when I was writing it, but I was like, let's complete it, get it done. That's another piece of advice I would give is get it through to completion. But then I threw out the last 120 pages. I knew exactly where to cut it. I kept everything before then, didn't change anything. But the last 120 pages had to go. It originally ended in Miami, and it had this whole like Miami Vice thing that just didn't work at all. I don't know. Maybe I'd been watching. Maybe I was listening to Phil Collins. I don't know what happened.
Nice.
But what was great about it was as soon as I read it the wrong way, I knew exactly what the right way was. Mm-hmm. So I had no hesitation to hit delete and then rewrite the 120 pages. And if you're not ready to do that, then you're not ready to write a novel because you got to be willing to, cut what's not working.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know that even as a short story writer, but yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's something we had a little bit of a conversation about that via email. And I think what started it was I was telling you that, the idea of outlining a novel, I just do short stories and I'd love to write a novel one day, but I'm so unorganized. And the idea of outlining it and knowing everything that's going to happen before I start writing it was so daunting. And you said that and you gave me the reasons you said, but you also said, it makes it kind of fun once you get to that halfway point. Now you get to figure out with the characters, okay, now what happens? How do you get out of this or whatever?
Well, so, by the midway point, your characters should live and breathe on their own. They should definitely start to have opinions and say things that you don't, that you weren't expecting them to say or do. And that happens all the time. And, I always have a basic idea of where it's going. So like right now, like I have an outline for the third book. I'm waiting to see what the reaction is to the second one before I commit to it. But assuming people like Murder Mind, because right now it's got more pre-orders than my first 4 books combined, which is terrifying. A lot of anxiety to that because you're like, oh, wow, now people are actually looking forward to this. I've never had anybody looking forward to one of my books before. So now I actually have a little bit of an audience. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So assuming that I don't let them down with Murder Mind, assuming that they like it, then I will start in next month in July. The book comes out June 19th. So I'll have some feedback by mid-July, and then I'll start writing the third one. But I have the first half outlined, and I get it to the most dramatic point that I can think of, and I have no idea what Shelley's going to do after this point. And that's what I did with Murder Mind. And in Murder Mind, I feel like it has my best midway point. Ironically, my weakest midway point is my very first book. My midway point to my first book was that they find the ship, and I love the visual of it because the ship is actually phased into the landscape. There's a line in the book about how it looked like God had just created this landscape and the ship had always been there. And trees are growing in and out of it and this and that.
Yeah, that was cool image.
But midway point should not be a visual. And that's something I learned. And on my second book, I was a much stronger midway point. The whole first half is about Area 51. And then something happens. And now we're off to the races on the second half.
Yeah.
And that was a lesson that I learned as I went. I still stand behind the ship. I'm just saying that of my midway points, that's the only one that I'm like, I could have stuck the landing better on that one. More could have been at stake.
I hear what you're saying. As a reader, though, I did appreciate that visual. I like that a lot.
Good. Yeah, it was actually one of the first things I thought of when I thought of the ship back in like 2011 or something when I originally wrote the notes for that.
Nice. I like that you said that, by the midpoint, your character should be living and breathing on their own. It kind of reminds me of, I guess it's not quite the same thing, but Robert E. Howard, when he was talking about the idea of Conan, he's like, and Robert E. Howard's kind of crazy anyways, like this image of this man appeared before him and, telling him his adventures or whatever, So,
I mean, definitely, when you get to a point, especially when you start writing a series, those characters really do start to have a voice of their own. And another piece of advice I might give to writers, assuming that I just keep assuming that there are writers watching this.
I have a lot of writers and artist storytellers in the chat.
Then another piece of advice I would give is point of view is very important. None of my villains are wrong. Never have I written an antagonist in my books that are wrong. That doesn't mean that the heroes are wrong. It just means that I can completely understand their point of view.
Sure.
So I never write like a Nazi type character because that would be really hard to come up with, with a reason for why you want to wipe out, a third of the population. Whatever.
Yeah.
But I do write villains that have a very good reason for why they're doing it, and you can completely understand. On the other end of the spectrum, though, you don't want to do Star Trek Insurrection. That's a movie where, for some reason, nobody thought that actually the bad guys are 100% right and Picard is 100% wrong. Because in that movie, the idea is that they're trying to protect 200 people from the Fountain of Youth. No, you move those 200 people and you give billions of people the Fountain of Youth and cure cancer and do all that. So they were wrong in that. So you don't want a bad guy to be that right. But you do want to make sure that your antagonist has a very good point of view, that people Thanos was a good example of that I understood why Thanos was doing what he was doing.
Sure. Yeah.
So I try to always have people that aren't villains, they're antagonists. And I think that point of view in every character is really what drives people to turn pages. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you succeed in that. I got a couple of themes that I see, like common themes in the book so far, that I was going to run by you in a moment. But let me just get these super chats before. I think Crystal Ashes is being cheeky here with us. Will the centipede appear in the sequel? I doubt it.
Unfortunately, there's actually nothing that adult in the new one, which is surprising. It didn't just happen that way. The next one's a road trip, so they probably didn't have time to stop off at it.
And it's organic in the it's organic in the first one because they're trying to fight or solve this murder, and one of their suspects or witnesses works in the club. So
yeah, exactly.
Studio Super says, for me, that was a big appeal for Star Trek, the original series. All these unique problems happening for our crew. How will they get out of them this week and what's not? You probably enjoyed
Star Trek. Spock was a huge influence on Shelley. I had a reviewer, this one website, Reading Freely, actually put Shelley in their top 10 sci-fi books of 2024, which was very nice.
Nice.
But they said that Shelley reminded them of 7 of 9, which I have nothing against 7 of 9. I thought she was a really great actress who did a really good portrayal. But she was aping Spock, same thing I'm doing. So I mean, really, we just had the same influence. I wasn't influenced. I went back to the original well, just like they did. I wasn't looking at 7 of 9. I was looking at Spock because Spock was interesting, and Shelley has pre-programmed emotions because to be a detective, her creator, Dr. Abraham, thought that she should be able to follow a hunch, and that's one of the aspects of the first book is Shelley learning how to follow a hunch and using her emotion. And so she considers them a hindrance. A human weakness that should never have been put in any more than she should have looked like a woman. And that's the transition in the book is her growth in that. I mean, I got that. I totally stole that from Spock, the original.
Yeah, that's good. That's great though. Well, that kind of brings me to, some writers, you ask them about it and they're kind of like, they're not interested in talking about this. They're just kind of divorced from their themes. Their themes show up and they are what they are. But I just always find it interesting, especially as an English professor. I find it interesting because one of the things that draws me to your work is the theme of humanity. What is the legacy in the ship series and stuff like you were saying, but also just what does it mean? What defines us as humans? On the one level is the pronouns. On the other level, Shelley has a heart. That we find out in the beginning, or Dr. Abraham, gave her a heart.
Machine heart. Yeah, it makes it sound like a heartbeat. Yeah, it's artificial. Yeah.
And it's kind of like what people do really defines their humanity. I don't want to give it away, but especially towards the end of Shelley, when there's a real conundrum.
Don't give away the big twist ending.
But it's a question that pops up over and over again, which I really love because that also helps define the heroes versus the villains. If both people are doing things that they really truly believe should be done or is right, which is the more human, or whatever. And it's just, just questions that the book asks the reader, kind of to contemplate, which I appreciate. I don't know how much you think of that when you go in, or is that just something that sort of organically happens?
I think it organically happens. I think
because you've got Casey and Shelley, who are both dealing with sort of evolutions and are they human, are they not, and so forth.
Well, the two series are actually directly connected. It doesn't say that in the book, but there is a scene in the original Ship book where the hero, Casey Stevens, sees a brief glimpse of the future. And in that brief glimpse, she sees a man-machine war that wipes out humanity. And Shelley's series takes place before that man-machine war. We'll never show the war because these are detective procedurals and crime stories, but I know what's coming. So, that's always in the back of my head. And that helps me sometimes with the bad guy, who maybe the bad guy's doing things to avert a war or try to give humans an advantage or something like that. Then maybe the bad guy is not completely wrong, but that's in hindsight. I'm seeing it here, Yeah. So I definitely play with that whole, the evolution is a big part of all my books.
Yeah, I like the morality too, because both Jake and Harold have religion in their background, right? But then they're sort of they're having questions of faith, or questions of morality, and then their adventures, kind of force them on a journey of choosing different things and whatnot. So I love that. I guess maybe sound like I'm jumping. Well, no, let me get the connective tissue. There was about the villains. Really cool sort of utilitarianism that I see show up as some of the villains, which is a great thing. I mean, if these are government men, for example, or even some of the individuals in Shelley, at one point, one of the lines is, at least America will be the strongest, superpower or something like that. And I like that theme of sort of the collective versus the individual that shows up in the books. These are just things that I kind of resonate with when I'm reading a story. So, but again, you just kind of organically, that just shows up, and you don't really think about that too much.
I try to give every one of my characters their own moral center, which might sound odd for a villain, especially if they're trying to wipe out millions of people. But they do have their own moral code. They do have their own beliefs. And like in the Ship books, I remember in the first Ship book, there was a character called Reese, who was a military guy. And I don't like it when a lot of books like crap on the military and this and that. So I really gave him a heart and soul. He had done bad things, and I talk about that. But he also, there's a scene where he's talking to a boy, and he says something along the lines of, parents die for their kids, not the other way around, or something, which was directly related to something that happened. The boy had to do something bad to an adult. Yeah. And he did that to save himself. And Reese was like, I was trying to show that he was an honorable man. The Ship was, that whole series, every single one of them is all about trauma. And they each face trauma in different ways, because the Ship is sentient. The Ship is alive, and it communicates with the people, and it projects images in their heads, and it can screw around their heads. And I think it's just trying to communicate with them, but it does it in a way that our minds have trouble processing, and it brings up a lot of trauma. And so every character in the Ship trilogy is dealing with trauma in some way, shape, or form. And in the third one, she's trying to forget the trauma, and that you'll see that when you get to the third one. But in the first one, the only character that is not affected by the Ship is the military guy, because early on in the book, you see a flashback where he was going to commit suicide and he didn't. He chose not to, and he had a reason for not doing that. Yeah. And then when he gets into the Ship and the Ship starts screwing with his head, he knows it's not real. He's already faced his demons. And I like the idea of the military man being the person who had already faced his demons and was the one person who was not directly affected by the Ship. So, I do try to have a certain level of morality to all my characters, including my villains, that they all have some sort of moral core that I can resonate with, because I think that actually makes, like, again, we were talking about Thanos, that made him more interesting, that he did have a moral core. It was screwed up and all that, but he had a belief system. And I find villains or antagonists with a belief system, or heroes, obviously, that if they have a strong belief system, that I, as the reader or the viewer, can completely say, I get that. I get where he's coming from. That makes it 1,000 times the conflict, 1,000 times more interesting. Yeah.
Even McClellan in the Ship's Revenge, when I first got to him, I thought, oh, I'm not going to like this guy very much. He's one of those or whatever. But then you're like, no, I really appreciate this guy, where he's coming from.
He wanted to live up to his dad.
Yeah. I like that. Also too, you said that your points of view or whatever is one of the things you really kind of focused on with your novel writing. And I mean, Shelley, we have Shelley's point of view, her interiority, and Jake's. Yeah. And I remember when I was first reading Shelley, and I got, I was opening up, it, not she, everything you said. And I'm getting to know Shelley a little bit through her actions. And I'm thinking, really interesting character, but how invested am I going to be in this machine that's talking about the human parts of her are annoying or whatever,
Right.
but that's not the case at all. I mean, I am 100% engaged with her, and you've got a really neat way of doing it where it's like she's, even in insisting that she's a machine and not human, she understands the way people are thinking, and she even, on one hand, not having people skills, she's able to manipulate people, like with knowing their psychology and stuff. So it really is a cool little
contradictions is a great way to make a character interesting. Is that
nice?
If they contradict themselves in some way, not like verbally, but just like sometimes what they say and what they're thinking is a little bit contradictory, because people are contradictory. And I think the more advanced machines will get, and the more closer they get to humanity, they'll start to have some contradictions, especially if you're able to start imbuing them with emotions, which is problematic, I think. And that's one of the it's throughout the series that becomes more problematic.
Yeah. Well, I've got more questions, and we definitely got plenty of things to fill the space. But before we do reach too far, then I do want to look forward to Murder Mind a little bit. So we do know that Shelley is in this new transition or era of her existence that you've talked about. It's really, that's gonna be cool to find out. But Jake you've teased, I think, even in the blurb or whatever, Jake's still a part of this book, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, well, their partnership, that would be like doing Mulder without Scully. Like, you have to have the two. It's the dynamic between the two that the readers really latched onto. And I mean, I had already planned to do that, but before I started looking at reviews and stuff. And the three big things they said was, two biggest things were they really liked the dynamic and the relationship between these two partners, and they really liked the world. And so those were the two main things I focused on. The other thing that a lot of people liked was that they really liked the villain. But the thing with the villain was I couldn't do a Moriarty type villain in every book. And in the first book, you kind of know who the villain is by the midway point. You haven't met them yet, but you gotten some taste of them. And so with this book, I decided to go more what I call the Agatha Christie route, where you don't really know the villain is up until the very end.
Oh,
and
nice.
And Shelley and Jake think that it's different. One thinks it's a human, one thinks it's a machine, and that you're not sure who's right. So I decided to go more in that route. Now, the only concern with that is that the villain isn't going to be as fleshed out as the guy in the first book who had like pages upon pages to expound his point of view. But I think it also gave me time to really get to know their characters are much deeper in this one, Jake and Shelley. And the villains, really the thing with the villain is that they're manipulating society. And so society becomes the big danger here to our heroes, like directly, physically a danger to our heroes. Nice. And so I thought that was an interesting approach. Just because I couldn't do a Moriarty type villain every book. I thought about it. I was like, that's going to be like too much of a repeat. So
Sure. I never thought of him like Moriarty villain, but yeah, I like that. I do like, I second that with Jake and Shelley, because Jake comes from that background. When we first meet him, we find out he was sort of more of a desk analyst, in terms of, so he's thinking along the same lines that Shelley's thinking, even they're doing it in different ways. So yeah, they do make a great pair. They do like the chemistry.
The thing with that book is, and with all my books, both the ship and this, I wouldn't say so much of the ship sequels, just because by that time the characters are really fully developed. But I definitely start with archetype characters. I definitely start with trope characters. So you've got in Shelley, you've got the guy who's never been on the field before, and you've got the android detective who has emotions, but there's some tropishness to that. But then if I've done my job right, within 50 pages, you're starting to see, oh no, this is going much deeper than I ever expected it to. So I'm taking those tropey characters. I'm like, well, how can we stretch them? How can we change them? So that you start with, oh, I know where this is going. I know who these guys are. Oh, this can be like iRobot. I got it. And then you get pages in, you get to the murder scene, you start seeing these really odd things going on, like stuff. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. This is not iRobot. This is going very different way. Yeah, and the killer is not just a standard robot. It's a different kind of approach, and it's talking about a bigger things.
Yeah, much bigger thing. That kind of plays into Studio Super's chat there. Comment: I do like a villain like Dr. Doom. He has a cliche aim of wanting to rule the world, but the reasoning sets him apart, as he truly believes the world will be a better place under him. Now, when is remind me again the release date for Shelley Murder Mind?
June 18th. June 19th. June 19th. I should know my own release date. June 19th. I believe it's a Thursday. Originally, we released it there because we were going to go to Vegas Comic-Con.
Oh, nice.
But we didn't end up doing it this year.
Okay.
So because we had kids in camp and all this stuff going on.
Oh,
so
sure.
we didn't do it. But so it's coming out. All my books release in May or June. So
Okay.
I think actually Shelley came out in April for some reason. That was because we were doing another Comic-Con or something. And then we do LA Comic-Con every year. And it's always nice to see a lot of people coming back and be like, oh, I took a chance on this book and now I want to get the rest and this and that. And that's, so we try to do LA Comic-Con every year.
Is that the so the hard copy is released on the 19th? You said, is the Audible also released? Because sometimes that comes later.
No, the ebook, paperback, and hardcover will release on the 19th. The audiobook probably won't be somewhere around the holidays. It usually takes about 6 months before that gets all done. Maybe a little bit sooner than that. Maybe October or November. Probably October. Something in that area. Do
you think you'll have the same reader? Because she did a great job with all the characters.
Yeah, no, I already talked to her. I'm bringing her back. Yeah, well, she's actually Kelly Tager's like a really well-known. She works for Bantam, I think. I think I've heard
her do some Star Wars books, if I'm not mistaken.
No, she hasn't done Star Wars, but she does a lot. She actually does a lot of usually like romance books and stuff. So she jumped at Shelley because she was like, "Hey, killer robots, okay? There's something different." And she really shines. I mean, she really shines with all the voices. So as soon as I finished the book, even while we were still formatting, she was my first call. I was like, "Hey, can I?" Because I was amazed that we got her the first time around. So we were originally we had an odd thing happen with the first book. We had a different team that was supposed to do the audiobook, and then they found out there was a single line of Hebrew in it because one of the characters is Jewish, and they bounced out. And then Kelly Tager heard about that and was like, "I'll do it," because I think she's half Jewish or something. She's like,
"Nice."
And she's like a really big name. I mean, she's like really well known in the industry. And so that worked out really well for us. So I guess there's a case of crazy anti-Semitism working out well in our favor.
Exactly.
But, so it's just, that was a weird situation. So it was like
great.
one line out of 75,000 words. I'm like, really? This is what you're dying on? So
that's great. That's crazy. Do you want to do the giveaway so we get that in before we
Absolutely. So I'll give you away a signed copy of Shelley hardcover. So here goes the question to anybody who's interested in getting it. And then you can you'll give Professor Geek or his team, his wife or whatever address, and I'll make sure you get it in a week or so. All right, here we go. Here's the question. In 1982, one of my favorite movies, Conan the Barbarian, came out. James Earl Jones played the villain. But the villain was not actually from the Conan books. He was from some other books. Who was the villain and where did the villain come from?
And I know we got some Conan fans out there. So do you want to say the villain's name or do you want to leave that up to them to figure out?
Well, I think if I tell them the name, they're going to be able to Google that a lot faster.
True. That's true. Okay. So we will, the first person to get this question, where did the James Earl Jones villain in the Conan, the movie, where did he come from? Because he didn't come from Conan books.
Where did he come from? It weren't Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah. And that will get you a free signed copy of Shelley. So while people are thinking and mulling over that, I mean, there's so many other questions I wanted to ask you. So we definitely gonna have to have you come back, even just to talk Star Wars novels or something like that too at one point. But I had a couple of questions that were just kind of fun questions. But did you have anything else you wanted to talk about that I missed on the writing or anything?
Hey, Thulsa Doom in Call. There we go.
There you go, Ohas.
All right, so you're getting a free signed copy. You're actually getting the one I'm holding right here. So
awesome.
It will be in the mail on Monday.
Yeah. So Sound Engraver is going to write my email address in the chat there for you, Ohas, and you just send me your mailing address or whatever to that email, and I'll send it to Doug, and he will ship it out to you. So congratulations.
It's really a stroke to bring Thulsa Doom in too, because it does like why Conan had so many villains, but I mean that was a great villain. So I don't think he actually had. I don't think the Thulsa Doom in the movie was anything like the character in the book. I can't remember. It was in the story about mirrors. I think I can't remember. It's been so long since I read Cull. But so I always thought it was interesting that Milius, the guy who wrote and directed it, decided to take a villain from a totally different book.
Yeah, I love Cole and Cull and Conan. One of the little filler questions I had for you, watch I'll slip in since we're talking about Howard, was I think we both agreed that we both like to read Howard's, Conan. But what writer do you think handles Conan the best outside of Howard, like after Howard?
Okay, hold on. Nobody is going to agree with me on this, but I remember the old Lancer books from when I was a kid, and I love Conan the Buccaneer. I love this book. The Frazetta cover helps. I loved this book when I was a kid. I've read it at least 5 times, 6 times in my life. And so this is by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. They get a lot of crap because they interjected their stories along with Howard's stories in the old Lancer books. But people who say that, I don't think were around in the 70s, because in the 70s, Conan was dead if it wasn't for what L. Sprague de Camp was doing. He brought them back. Now, Frazetta had a lot to do with that, the covers. Yeah. But they really did. They brought them in. And so when I was a kid, I wasn't looking at these were Howard stories. These were L. Sprague de Camp's.
Sure.
I can see them now as an adult who reads. I can definitely see the difference. And I'm not saying that this is up to Howard's level. But this is a really fun, cheesy read. And if you like Conan the Barbarian, I highly recommend Conan the Buccaneer. After you read, Howard's main story.
Of course. Yeah. I like the camp stuff. I haven't read that one, but I like the camp stuff. I was reading, I think, Robert Jordan's back in the day when I was a kid and whatnot. But
the big book that really did it for me, though, to become really interested in sci-fi and everything was Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. Okay. I was 16 and they had a English reading class for science fiction. When you're a kid, the last thing you want to do is in high school go to another English class. But English lit on sci-fi. I'm like, okay. I thought it'd be like Star Wars because that's all I really knew about sci-fi at the time, and which actually isn't even sci-fi; it's space fantasy. But they had the first book was Childhood's End, and it just absolutely blew my mind. And so, that was, I don't know if it would have the same impact at 53, but when I was 16, I was like, oh, wow, new ideas. And that book is actually all about evolution, as it would turn out.
Oh, nice.
So it turns out that, I went full circle there. I didn't mean to, but now that you mentioned it, I did go full circle.
I haven't checked that one out yet. I'll have to check that one out. That in Sphere, the movie Sphere, you'd recommend it. I have to check out too.
Yeah, the ending is awful. It's a terrible last scene. It's like they shot that in an hour or something. I don't know. It's like, I don't know. They didn't have the time. But the rest of the movie outside of the last scene, I think is one of the best sci-fi movies of the 90s.
Nice.
It's not a high bar. There weren't a lot of great sci-fi movies in the 90s. I mean, obviously The Matrix is number one. But Sphere is really good. And a killer cast. I mean, cool. Dustin Hoffman and Sharon Stone. Sharon Stone's haircut was the design for this, by the way. Sharon
really?
Stone's haircut in Sphere was the design for this. I gave her
nice
Sharon Stone. So
that's cool.
Shout out to Sharon Stone there.
Yeah.
And Samuel Jackson, who's in like everything, is in Sphere. I met him at a party once, and he was a really nice guy. And I was talking to him. I was like, "Oh, it really sucks that Mace Windu got killed." He goes, "He's not dead. He's not dead. He's coming back. He's coming back." This was years ago. I think this was right around the time Disney had just acquired or something. He's like, "It's coming back. If someday you see him come back, don't be surprised." Back. He's been wanting to do it for a long time.
I've talked a lot about Shatterpoint and how, man, that just really made that character so big in my mind. That was great.
Absolutely, it's a really good book. I mean, it's Heart of Darkness, but it's it's Apocalypse Now. For those of you who know Heart of Darkness, it was Apocalypse Now in space, but it was a really good. Matthew Stover's a really good writer. I'm a big Star Wars EU fan. I haven't read any of the new ones. I've given up on them completely.
Yeah,
the EU was fantastic. I've read well over 100 of them. James Lucchino, I think he's my favorite. Dark Plague is hands down my favorite Star Wars book. But I also like Yoda Dark Rendezvous, which I know you just recently reviewed. Yeah. That's one of the top 3 or 4. And I also like Cloak of Deception, which is anybody who likes the politics of Star Wars. That's a good one too.
Yeah, I think that might be one of my summer reads.
I'm a new guy.
Yeah.
Read Shelley, then totally check out Cloak of Deception. It's really cool.
Exactly. Yeah. So please do. I talk a lot on my channel about how I don't like a lot of new stories, whether movies, books, or whatever. So I do look a lot at the classics, talk about the classics. But man, when you find something good that's new, man, latch onto it and try and get some more from it, So I really appreciate you coming on the stream here and talking about your books and what's to come. I look forward to Murder Mind. I can't wait to get my copy and to tear through it. So yeah, is there anything else? I think I got sidetracked with Ohaz's answer when I was asking this before, but anything else you wanted to mention or bring up before we wrap it down?
No, I mean, I'd like to say thanks to anybody who took the time to listen, and the publishing industry and the film industry and everything, it's very different than in the 80s and the 90s. And my books, I really take a lot of nods from the 80s and the 90s and the stuff that I grew up with. And I give it a fresh coat of paint and I make it more, scientific concepts and stuff. But modern scientific concepts and stuff. But I definitely take my nods from, X-Files, Aliens, The Thing, the stuff that I grew up with. So I would say that, if you like any of those kinds of things and you like the idea of, government conspiracy, but mixed with androids instead of aliens, maybe we give Shelley a shot.
Definitely. Yeah. And you can definitely count on a review of Murder Mine, once it comes out, once I get a chance to read that as well. So yeah, love to have you back though, to talk about, there's more writing stuff I have that we just didn't get to, and more just fan out geek stuff. So at some point when it works out for your schedule.
I really enjoyed your reviews. I really appreciate it. It's nice when somebody's willing to take a chance on a newbie. And I don't have any giant machine behind me, any big publishing machine behind me. So anytime, a YouTuber or something like that is willing to take a chance on me, I really appreciate it. And anytime anybody's willing to, take a chance and spend their time and their money, more even time is really the biggest thing. Sit down and say, I'm going to take a chance on this new guy. That really means a lot to me. I appreciate it. Yeah. And, my big thing is, I read for about 15 to 20 minutes a night, maybe 10 if I don't have a lot of time. And so when I write, that is always in my head. If I don't write something interesting every 5 to 10 minutes, I failed as an author and you should burn my book. Okay, don't burn it because that's getting a little Gestapo. But, I definitely feel that something exciting should happen or something really interesting should happen every 10 minutes because that's about how long I'll give a book when I'm sitting down at night. Is I'll give it 10, maybe 15 minutes. I'll give it, 20, 30 pages to get started. But after that, you got to keep it moving. And, I do notice that a lot of the books that I read, I kind of abandon about halfway through. And that's why that advice about the midway point is something that I stick to so that nobody's abandoning me, hopefully, at the halfway point.
Yeah. And that was one thing too that I had notes. So we were talking about some of the self-publishing stuff, or you got to know the business today side of it, the marketing side, and all of that stuff. There's gone are the days when we could just be writers and send our things off to some big machine to do everything for us. So maybe
that's a good thing because artists today need to own their own work. It's so important. For those of you who are in our own age group, probably remember in the 90s when we all thought Prince went crazy with the whole name change and everything. He wrote slave on his face. He's got $100 million contract and he's complaining about it. And we're all like, what are you talking about? But he was right about everything. Warner Brothers owned his masters. The guy was alone making When Doves Cry. Why should anybody own that forever when it was him? They should own it for a period of time and then that be it. A writer named Peter David, he worked on Star Trek, he worked on Hulk. He died in debt. He had to go online to ask for money to help with his medical bills. It's so important now for any writer out there, any artist out there, that you should own your own work. That doesn't mean that you can't do work for hire too. I do it every day with my storyboards, but then own something that you can build upon. Because if somebody say I didn't take my books to anybody, but say I took Shelley to a traditional publisher, they'd give me a newbie a $5,000 to $10,000 advance, maybe a little bit more if I'm lucky, and then they control the rights for that for however many years. Why would I possibly do that? That makes no sense. So I really think it's important that artists and writers, if you're not going to get anything else from this conversation, is that you should develop something, whether it's completely this or something on the side, that you own and that you develop to own for yourself. It's really important because these companies, they pay you a big paycheck and then that paycheck goes away in just a few months and you own nothing. Look at Deadpool, that Liefeld guy. I'm not a fan of his, but I do recognize they should have gotten some money for those Deadpool movies and he got nothing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. You brought up Prince again. That's why I got to ask you this before we go. Best Prince album.
The Gold Experience. Nobody's ever heard of it, I bet, watching this. Love the Gold Experience. The last 5 tracks on that are fantastic. But that was actually during the slave period. I really liked that. I saw him live during that period. And he wasn't playing any of the hits. He was just doing his own thing. And I really liked that. And,
nice.
But if you're talking 80s, then I would probably go Sign of the Times.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check. I haven't checked out the slave period. I love 1999 and of course the Batman, even though he distanced himself.
Batman was great. That was my first Prince album. That's a great album.
Awesome.
I was a Batman fan. I wasn't a Prince guy. In fact, I couldn't stand Prince. But I got it because I was a Batman guy. I was like, I gotta get it. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is really good.
Really freaking awesome. Trust and all these great songs. Man, I loved it.
That was a work for hire, and he probably phoned it in. But his phoning in, he was still Prince on his worst day.
Freaking Prince, yeah.
That's a great album. Anybody who hasn't heard the Batman soundtrack, that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's of its time, though. You got to have a little grain of salt there it's of its time. It's very 1989.
this is probably a good way to wrap things up. So super got a chat here, which is the indie scene is a godsend. I used to dream about working for the big two. Now I got my own stuff and I'm never looking back. Keep rocking, man. Yeah, I think big two means DC Marvel. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what he meant. I know what he meant. I'm a geek.
That's right. You're a comic guy. I know
I've been a geek a long time. So
that's right.
Yeah, no, I get it. But yeah, no, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with doing something for Marvel and DC as well to pay the bills. But you should, if you're going to develop something, man, develop that on your own. Create that, and you'll have to put some money up front. Like I pay about $3,500, $4,000 to get my books totally done and ready to go. I spent a lot of time in that front. It's very hard. But I own Shelley, and I, if I ever was able to make a movie or something out of it, I would still own it. I would just be giving them the rights to for a few years to see if they could do something with it. But nobody can ever just take it away, because I've sold scripts for large sums of money, and then they just end up on the shelf, and it's like that money got spent pretty damn fast, Especially if you got kids, I know what I'm talking about. That money goes quick.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It, and struggle for a few months and actually own the stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, well, that's awesome. I can't wait to have you back. So we'll put something in the books
anytime. Absolutely.
Cool. Great, and thank you guys for hanging out with us. We got a lot of great info. I will cut this out and make individual videos just to help people get some more bite-sized content throughout the week, but you can come back next week. I'll have some more movie reviews and more things as usual, and we will see Doug back at one point soon as well. So thanks for watching, everybody.
We should talk Star Wars EU sometime. I'm all about it. Yeah,
Excellent.
You got to read what was that, Legacy of the Force, I think it was.
Yeah,
I really like this series. It went on way too long. It's 9 books. You could have totally trimmed that thing down to like 5 or 6, but I really like that one a lot. That was a fun one.
I'll have to read that one because you're way ahead of me in there, but I'm getting there.
Oh, well, I've been reading these since they first came out. So I'm over 100 books deep. I mean, I've got all the original editions in there and all that stuff.
Oh man, that's awesome.
None of the new stuff. And that's actually nothing against Disney. It's just that they're not allowed to grow. They're not allowed to change. They're not allowed to do anything. Well, the great thing with the Lucas years was he was like, I don't care what you guys do. It's sequels, kill you, do whatever you're going to do. Like, who cares, And that gave them some freedom to let characters grow and develop, and people could have children and you could have generations and stuff. Yeah. And so that's totally my sequel series for me. Yeah.
Because some of the same great authors from the EU are working on Disney books now, and it's not quite the same.
No, because like the first one out of the gate, James Lucchino did, I think it was Death Star, or maybe it was Tarkin. Tarkin was okay, but Death Star was, none of those books had, nothing was happening. It wasn't like when he did a great one that took place right before episode 3, Labyrinth of Evil. I like that one quite a bit. I definitely recommend
I haven't read that yet. I heard that's kind of a trilogy.
Is the one that nobody ever talks about. And if you like politics with your sci-fi, then Cloak of Deception's cool.
Cool. It'll happen. Well, as you can see, we've got lots of stuff to talk about. So we will definitely be back with more.
All right, man.
But thank you guys. Till next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the hero stories you like. Yeah. And check out Shelley. Links in the description.
Please do.
See you later.
Bye.